Hi, how's it going? This is Ron Piro again. I'm again just your average gringo on a quest to conquer Spanish. So today let's dive into a couple of the mistakes that I made when I started back in 2014 to learn Spanish, and basically kind of what I would do instead if I were going to be starting out today. So as I said in earlier videos, in 2019, after 5 solid years of studying basically nearly every day, I found myself still not really able to understand kind of even the most basic children's story or video. And so at that point, I was feeling really frustrated. After all the effort and work, and I kind of stopped to reflect on what I was doing wrong and try to figure that out. Well, I came away with 4 main problems with my approach. Those problems were, number 1, not having learned basic grammar and conjugation. Number 2 was spending way too much time focusing on building vocabulary instead of actually focusing on actual communication. 3, I was focusing on reading and writing for too long instead of developing my listening and pronunciation skills. And then number 4, I was letting the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to take a little closer look at each of these points. So as I say, for mistake number 1, that was not learning basic grammar and conjugation. So when I started my learning journey, like many people, I started to explore online and on places like YouTube. And back in 2014, Rosetta Stone was kind of the big deal, as well as things like Duolingo. And I kind of fell for the idea they had of just immerse yourself. And it actually turns out that at least my brain did not magically acquire Spanish the way that I was actually hoping it would. And I still really see a lot of this idea out there today. But I found this to be a really kind of the long way of trying to do it in reality. And so I kind of asked myself, well, why do I think they teach it this way? Why does this idea kind of persist? What I think about, after I thought about what I think happens is, these programs of course need to attract customers in order for them to make money. And I think that when a lot of people hear they have to study grammar rules, they think it doesn't really sound fun to me, and they might start looking somewhere else that's telling them that there might be a magic shortcut way to avoid studying grammar rules. But the truth is that once you do actually start to learn a few basic grammar lessons, you'll find that I found that things start to actually get exciting for me because they kind of started to click together, and finally I did start to understand things. Because if you think about it, grammar is the syntax of the language. So this is like the rules of the road. When you understand a little bit of basic grammar, suddenly you can start to kind of understand new things that you're reading just simply because you can apply these basic rules and kind of sound it out, so to speak. Kind of the way that we actually learned to read when we were write English when we were little kids. So the lesson learned here is grammar is the roadmap to understanding a language. And if I started today, I would start with a grammar resource like El Metodo in order to get that basic grammar syntax down pat. The second mistake was, again, vocabulary obsession. So instead of actual communication, when I started, I kind of had this idea in my head that if I built up a big enough vocabulary, that it would just kind of automatically somehow lead to becoming fluent in Spanish. But eventually what I realized was that the real way that a language works is that every language kind of tends to use a lot of little really common phrases over and over, and then we kind of sprinkle in the big words that we use to get our meaning across. If I were starting today, I would focus on these common phrases. An example of this in English would be I'm going to, which is, kind of like the Swiss Army knife of language, because with the little phrase I'm going to, you could basically add hundreds of like verbs or bigger words to it and convey lots and lots of different ideas and meanings. Like, I'm going to the grocery store, I'm going to go to bed, I'm going to tell you later. And so every language really has these basic power phrases, like I say, that can be used in combination with lots of other bigger and more specific words. And this is a good way to get lots of bigger ideas across. A new language learner can really benefit a lot from just learning some of these basic, really common phrases. And this will help them to be able to communicate lots of different ideas, kind of just a force multiplier. That with a phrase like that, there's lots of things by you just adding a verb to it that you can then communicate. So again, on this one, I would say the lesson learned is focus on learning key power phrases that allow you to then communicate many different ideas. Mistake number 3, only focusing on reading and writing while neglecting listening and pronunciation skills. So when I started to study Spanish, I was only focusing on learning to read and write, the written word basically. And I now realize that reading and writing are really only 2 parts of the 4 main skills. Reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Those are kind of like the fantastic 4 of language learning. And you definitely need all 4. And I foolishly left 2 of them out initially. But now I understand that listening comes with facial expressions and body language, gestures, and this is actually a really big part of communication. I think it's actually probably a bigger part than the words themselves. Plus, when you respond, you actually get immediate feedback from the native speaker that you're trying to talk to. Not to mention that in real conversations, you'll have actual context that kind of helps you with your understanding. So the lesson I learned here was to focus on reading, writing, speaking, and listening from the very beginning, pretty much. And mistake number 4, again, letting perfectionism be the enemy of the good enough. I have to say that the first time when you're actually going to try to speak to someone in a foreign language in a real setting, so not a classroom or a class or something like that, it can actually be a little scary. Because you almost have this idea in your mind that your Spanish needs to be perfect. It almost feels like you might get punished if you say it incorrectly. But the best advice is for you to just relax, because native speakers are not going to send you to language jail if you slip up. And actually, they're going to be more likely to say, you know, I think you might be trying to say this instead of what you actually said. Because, I mean, the human mind is actually pretty amazing when it comes to language. And so basically a native speaker is very likely to be able to figure out what it is that you're trying to say, even if you say it totally incorrectly. And then they'll most likely correct you, and then you guys might even have a pretty good laugh about it. And this is all really just part of learning a new language, and it's totally normal. So the best advice I can give you is to just jump in, start speaking as soon as possible. And again, the lesson learned here, don't wait until you think your Spanish is perfect before you actually start trying to speak to a native speaker. So I hope this helps you out. Like I say, these are the tools I use, and I would say, mis amigos, learn from my blunders and embrace a new approach to learning language. Grammar, again, is your trusty guide. Again, remember, communication always beats vocabulary obsession. Reading, writing, listening, and speaking all go hand in hand. And again, don't worry too much about being perfect. Just jump in there, start speaking now, and armed with these insights, go forth and conquer the Spanish speaking world like the language champion that you are. And I'll say to you finally, Buena suerte, which is good luck. Thanks.